Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
4 years ago, my grandparents passed away within months of each other. They'd been married for 63 years, and honestly, I think my grandpa just couldn't bear to be without my grandma. They left me their house and their will. It was this beautiful old place where I'd spent every summer as a kid, learning to ride a bike in the driveway and helping my grandpa in the garden. Those memories meant everything to me, so instead of selling it right away, I decided to move in while I figured out what to do long term. I'd been there less than a week when three people showed up at my door one Saturday morning. They introduced themselves as the board members of the Homeowners Association and said they were there to get my membership paperwork finalized. I told them I didn't know there was a Homeowners Association in the neighborhood. They told me that there was one, and I was already a week late on signing the papers. Then they said they needed to come in and do a quick inspection. Before I could even respond, the third guy just walked past me toward my garage. I asked him where he thought he was going. He told me he needed to check my garage and that it was his right to inspect it weekly. Then he added that if I denied him access, it would be a $250 fine. I stepped in front of him and blocked his path, saying he wasn't going anywhere because this was my property and he had no right to just walk around it. The first board member got aggressive then, telling me to listen and that they had rules in this neighborhood that everyone followed. He said my grandparents understood that. I told him my grandparents never mentioned any homeowners association to me, not even once. The second board member said that my grandparents were members, so now I was too. Then he shoved a stack of documents at my chest and told me to sign them. I grabbed them more out of reflex than anything else and said I needed time to read them first. The third board member said I should have signed them before moving in and that every day I delayed was another violation. I'd had enough of these pushy strangers in my house. I told them to get out, all of them, right now. The first board member said I was making a big mistake and that the papers needed to be signed immediately. I yelled at them to leave. After I slammed the door behind them, I sat down and actually read what they'd tried to force me to sign. It was absolutely insane. They wanted the right to enter my home weekly. I couldn't store anything in my garage except cars. No gas cans, no containers of any kind. I had to mow my lawn every single week. If it snowed, I had to shovel every 2 hours, starting at 5 o'clock in the morning. I could only park one car outside my garage. The list went on and on. I laughed and threw the papers in the trash. A few days later they came back. The second board member said they were there for the signed paperwork and to conduct their garage inspection. I told them I wasn't signing anything, and they weren't inspecting anything. I said I wasn't joining their association. The first board member said I was in violation and there would be trouble. I told them to do whatever they wanted and to leave my property. Over the next week, they sent me fine notices totaling over $1,000. Denying them access was $250 each time. I didn't even bother reading them all. I just used them as kindling for my grill. Then came the day everything exploded. I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon and immediately knew something was wrong. There was a tree service truck in front of my house, and I could hear a chainsaw running. When I pulled into my driveway, my stomach dropped. In my front yard stood two massive oak trees. My great-grandparents had planted them when they were newlyweds, using seeds they'd brought from the old country. My grandpa used to tell me stories about how he'd helped his grandfather water them when he was a boy. They were over 80 years old, towering and beautiful. One of them was already destroyed. Just a stump remained surrounded by branches and leaves. Workers were actively cutting into the second one. I jumped out of my car and ran over, yelling at them to stop and asking what they were doing. One of the tree workers said they were removing the trees and that they'd been hired by the Homeowners Association. I told them I was the owner of this property and nobody had authorized this. I looked around frantically and saw one of the board members standing in my garage, which was wide open. My garage that I'd locked with a heavy-duty bike lock. I shouted at him, asking what the hell he was doing in my garage. He said he was conducting his inspection and that because I've been denying him access, he had to take matters into his own hands. I asked if he'd broken into my garage. He said he'd used necessary force to fulfill his duties as a board member. I turned back to the tree workers and told them these people had no authority here and that what they were doing was completely illegal. I said I never gave anyone permission to touch these trees. The tree workers said they were told the owner had agreed because the trees violated association rules about leaf debris. The first board member chimed in, saying the trees produced more than 140-liter bag of leaves every 2 weeks and that it was a clear violation. He said the bylaws stated I had to remove them. I shouted that I didn't care about their fake bylaws and that these trees were planted by my great-grandparents. The first board member said if I just signed the membership agreement, this all could have been avoided. I called the police right there. When the officers arrived, I explained everything: the broken lock on my garage, the destroyed trees, the harassment. The board members actually tried to argue that they had the right to do what they'd done because I was in violation of association rules. One of the officers asked if they had documentation showing I'd signed a contract with their association. The second board member stammered that they didn't, but my grandparents were members, so I should be too. The officer said that meant they'd committed breaking and entering, trespassing, and destruction of property. I pressed charges for everything. The court case was incredible. Not only did they have to pay for my destroyed lock, but they had to compensate me for the oak tree. A professional arborist appraised it at over $50,000. The second tree needed extensive professional care to recover from the damage, which cost another $1,000. And because these idiots thought the judgment was unfair, they appealed it, racking up an additional $10,000 to $15,000 in legal fees. All told, they owed me around $120,000. But I wasn't done. I filed another civil suit for emotional damages. In court, I explained how much these trees meant to me, how my great-grandparents had planted them with seeds from their homeland, how my grandfather used to tell me stories under their shade. I told the judge I felt threatened by the homeowners association and could hardly sleep because I always feared they'd try to break into my house again. The court actually bought it. They awarded me $500,000, plus the costs for a state-of-the-art alarm system so I could feel safe again in my own home. Altogether, I cost the homeowners association nearly $750,000. They had to file for bankruptcy. A mediator was appointed to check their books to make sure I got my money. That's when things got even better. The mediator discovered that these three jerks had been defrauding the homeowners association for well over 10 years. They'd been giving out as many fines as they possibly could and pocketing the money to boost their own income. All three of them had to sell their houses to pay me out. Now I'm one of the favorite people in the neighborhood. I constantly get invited over for barbecues and dinners. Turns out most people never wanted the homeowners association in the first place. The board members had practically forced everyone to sign the contract, claiming it wasn't optional and that if they didn't sign before moving in, they'd face a $500 fine. Only 6 of the over 50 members actually wanted the association, and people think those 6 got a cut of the fine money as a reward for spying on their neighbors to find violations. My great-grandparents' house is still standing and so is that second oak tree. I'm the type of person who tries to see the good in everyone. Maybe that's why I didn't see it coming when everything fell apart. I'm in my early 20s, studying at a state university, and I've always loved being social. I work part-time at a coffee shop to help with expenses, and I'd been saving up for years to take a trip to Europe. It was my dream, something I'd planned since high school. My parents couldn't afford to send me, so every extra shift, every birthday gift, every bit of spare money went into that travel fund. That's the context you need to understand why what happened next hurt so much. I met her through a mutual friend at a study group. Let's call her Karen because that's exactly what she turned out to be. When we first met, she seemed cool. We started hanging out between classes, grabbing coffee, doing normal friend stuff. I thought I'd found someone who got me, someone who shared my sense of humor and interests. Then came the party in June. I was excited, talking to some people about my upcoming trip. I'd finally saved enough, and I was leaving in a month. I wasn't bragging, just sharing my excitement with people who asked what my summer plans were. Karen was nearby, and I saw her face change when she heard me talking. She said loud enough for others to hear that she wished she could afford to just jet off to Europe like some people. There was this edge in her voice that made me uncomfortable. I tried to lighten the mood and told her that she totally could, explaining how I've been saving for 3 years and that it was definitely possible if she budgeted for it. She responded by saying it must be nice to have money to throw around. I explained that I didn't have extra money, that I worked 30 hours a week on top of classes, and that's why it took so long to save. But she just walked away with this expression on her face that I couldn't quite read. I should have known then that something was off. Within a week, everything changed. People in our friend group started acting weird around me. Someone I barely knew made a comment about how not everyone can be as privileged as some people. Another friend asked me point blank if I really thought I was better than everyone else. I was confused and hurt. I pulled aside my roommate, who I trusted, and asked her what was going on and why everyone was acting strange. She hesitated before telling me that she didn't know if she should say anything, but Karen had been telling people that I'd been really condescending about my trip. Karen was saying that I had called people who don't travel boring and small-minded. I was shocked and told my roommate I never said anything like that. She reassured me that she knew and didn't believe it, but Karen had been pretty convincing to others. I confronted Karen the next day in the student center. She was sitting with some people from our group, and I asked if we could talk privately. She asked me about what? Playing dumb. I told her we needed to talk about the rumors she'd been spreading about me. She claimed she didn't know what I was talking about. I pushed back and said yes she did, explaining that people were telling me she'd been saying I called them boring and small-minded for not traveling. She had the audacity to ask if I didn't basically say that. I denied it, saying I never said anything remotely like that and she knew it. She just shrugged and said she heard what she heard. I called her out for lying and asked why she was doing this to me. Her response was cold. She said maybe she just didn't like me, and asked if I ever thought of that. Her face was so smug, so satisfied. That's when I realized she wasn't my friend and never had been. She was just someone who enjoyed tearing others down. I walked away and decided to cut her out of my life completely. I focused on my real friends and tried to ignore the whispers, but Karen wasn't done with me. 3 weeks later, I got an alert on my phone about charges on my credit card. $400 at an online clothing store. Then another alert. $200 at a gaming site. I immediately called my bank to freeze the card and dispute the charges. My hands were shaking. I didn't have money to spare. That afternoon, I got a message from the mutual friend who'd introduced us in the first place. He said he needed to tell me something important. Karen had been bragging the night before about how she had taught me a lesson. He thought she might have something to do with those charges. My stomach dropped. I texted Karen immediately and told her I knew what she did and that she needed to return my money now. She played innocent and said she had no idea what I was talking about. I clarified that I meant the credit card fraud and that I knew it was her. Her response was dismissive. She said it sounded like I should be more careful with my information and that it wasn't her problem. She didn't outright admit it, but the implication was clear. She wanted me to know it was her, but she was careful enough not to say it directly. I went to the police station that day and filed a report. I brought printed screenshots of our text, conversations, the timeline of events, everything. The officer was sympathetic but explained that proving it would be difficult. Karen had used something to hide her digital tracks, some kind of network thing that made it impossible to trace where the purchases came from. Without solid proof, they couldn't do anything. The case went nowhere. I got my money back from the bank eventually, but Karen faced no repercussions. That's when I decided I needed to handle this differently. I started telling people what had happened, not in a gossipy way, but with a genuine warning. I told our mutual friends, people in our classes, anyone who might be at risk of trusting her. I posted about it on social media without using her name but with enough details that people in our circle would know. I described what happened, how someone had stolen my credit card information and committed fraud, and how the police couldn't help because of technical complications. The response was bigger than I expected. Other people started coming forward with their own stories about Karen. I wasn't the first person she'd targeted. Someone said she'd borrowed money and never paid it back. Another person said she'd spread rumors about them too. Her reputation crumbled fast. She started sending me messages telling me I needed to stop talking about her. I responded by saying I was just telling people the truth about what she did. She complained that I was ruining her life. I shot back that she ruined her own life by being a terrible person. 2 weeks later, I was at the mall with my roommate and another friend. We were looking at shoes when Karen appeared out of nowhere. Her face was red and she looked furious. She yelled that she'd told me to stop talking about her. I responded that I had every right to tell people what she did. She declared that she was done with me. Then she literally swung at me, just pulled her fist back and tried to punch me in the face. I'd taken a self-defense class my freshman year after a safety incident on campus, and my body just reacted. I stepped to the side and her fist went past my shoulder. Then I pushed her away hard and she stumbled backward. She came at me again, and this time I was ready. When she got close enough, I kicked her in the stomach. Not hard enough to seriously hurt her, but hard enough to make her double over. She tried to grab me and I kicked her in the shin, making her fall to the ground. She was on the floor crying and gasping, and she threatened to call the police. I told her to go ahead because I had nothing to hide. Mall security came first, then the actual police. Karen tried to tell them that I had attacked her for no reason, that I just came up and started hitting her. But my roommate and my other friend, plus 2 random shoppers who had seen the whole thing, all told the same story. Karen had thrown the first punch. I had only defended myself. The police arrested Karen for assault and battery. She was charged with a misdemeanor. I gave my statement, and the witnesses gave theirs. Karen was led away in handcuffs, still crying and yelling that it wasn't fair. She disappeared from social media, stopped showing up to any group events, and eventually transferred to a different school. The assault charge on her record made things difficult for her, and that her parents were furious about the whole situation. My trip to Europe was amazing. I went for 3 weeks, saw 6 countries, and made memories that I'll treasure forever. I've been on my own for about 5 years now. When my parents died in a car accident, I was 25 and completely lost. They were the kind of people who let me be whoever I wanted to be. When I dyed my hair bright pink in high school, they smiled and told me I looked beautiful. When I wore mismatched socks to family dinners, they just laughed. After they were gone, I felt like I'd lost the only people who really understood me. I drifted for a while. I worked at a coffee shop, then a bookstore, then walked dogs for money. Nothing felt right. I was just going through the motions, trying to figure out who I was supposed to be without them. When I finally saved up enough money, I bought a small house in what seemed like a quiet neighborhood. I thought maybe a fresh start would help me find myself again. That illusion shattered about 3 months in. I woke up one morning to someone pounding on my door. I stumbled out of bed, still half asleep, and opened it to find a group of 5 people standing on my porch. They all wore matching navy polo shirts with some kind of logo on them, and they were holding clipboards like they were about to conduct a very serious audit of my life. The woman at the front greeted me and explained that they were from the Homeowners Association. She said they'd received complaints about my yard and needed to have a word with me. My stomach dropped. I'd heard about homeowners associations before, but I didn't think they were actually this intense. I stood there in my pajamas, feeling like I'd been called to the principal's office. I told them to come in, though I wasn't sure I had much choice. They filed into my living room and sat down on my couch like they owned the place. The woman who'd spoken, who had short brown hair and the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled in its entire life, introduced herself. She was the head of the association. She pulled out a thick stack of papers from her clipboard. She told me they had received several complaints about my front yard. According to her, I hadn't been following the guidelines outlined in their community bylaws. I apologized and said I didn't know there were specific guidelines for my yard. She responded curtly that there were guidelines and they expected their residents to follow them. She proceeded to read off a list that seemed to go on forever. I was only allowed to plant certain types of grass. My hedges were supposed to be exactly 18 inches tall, no more, no less. I couldn't have more than 3 potted plants on my porch. My mailbox had to be one of 4 approved colors: white, black, beige, or gray. The list went on and on. I felt like a kid being lectured by a teacher. I've always been someone who does things my own way, and the idea of being told what to do with my own property made me feel like I was suffocating. I told her I understood the rules, but some of them seemed a bit excessive. She said she was sorry I felt that way, but the rules were in place to ensure the aesthetic integrity of their community. Her tone was so condescending that I could feel my face getting hot. I thanked them for their time and practically shoved them out the door. When I closed it, I leaned against it and let out a long breath. I knew I had to do something about my yard, but I wasn't going to let them tell me how to live. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into making my yard exactly what I wanted. I planted wildflowers in every color I could find. I painted my mailbox bright purple, which was definitely not one of the approved colors. I made a wine chime out of old spoons and forks from a thrift store and hung it on my porch. Every time I looked at it, I felt a little more like myself. Then one afternoon, while I was watering my flowers, I saw her walking up my driveway. Karen. She had her clipboard, of course, and she was scanning my yard like a detective looking for evidence. She said my yard was still not up to par with their community standards. I set down my watering can and turned to face her. I'd had enough. I told her I understood her concerns, but I believed that everyone should have the freedom to express themselves, even if it didn't fit into a strict set of guidelines. She scoffed and said that might be true elsewhere, but not in this community. She insisted they had a certain standard to uphold, and they couldn't have residents flaunting the rules. I could feel anger rising in my chest. Who did she think she was? I told her I appreciated her position, but I wasn't willing to sacrifice my individuality for the sake of conformity. I said I was willing to work with the association to find a compromise that worked for everyone, but I would not change who I am to fit into a mold. She looked genuinely shocked. I could tell she wasn't used to people standing up to her. She stammered for a second, then straightened her shoulders. She said they would take my request into consideration, but she couldn't make any promises. She turned and walked away. Her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. I stood there shaking, partly from adrenaline and partly from fear. I didn't know what they were going to do to me. The next few weeks were torture. I kept working on my yard, adding more flowers and even building a small birdhouse. Every day I expected another knock on my door, another lecture, maybe even a fine, but nothing came. Then one afternoon I found a letter in my mailbox. It was from the association. My hands were trembling when I opened it. The letter said that they had reviewed my request and decided to make an exception for my yard. They acknowledged that while my yard didn't fit their strict guidelines, it added diversity and character to the community. They even mentioned that several neighbors had complimented my wildflowers. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. They had actually listened. It was a nice ending to my suffering, surprising for sure, but overall nice, very nice. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.